Oops.
Our gracious Heavenly Father, we worship you and we thank you, Lord, for this another day, oh God, of time together, learning your words, studying your words. Father, thank you. Thank you for this privilege, oh God. Today, Lord, we come to you, Lord, in faith, believing, Lord, that you will enable our hearts and mind to learn the things that you want us to learn from your word. And we thank you, God, for the privilege, Lord, of having Pastor Tim teaching us, mentoring us. Father, thank you for his life and thank you for his family, oh God. And also, Lord, for all my brothers, Lord, here, thank you, God. I pray that you will continually mold us, equip us to become effective pastors and workers of your vineyard, O Lord. Father, thank you. We rest, Lord, ourselves to the Holy Spirit that He will guide us and will lead us and will continually, oh God, enable us to learn more from your words. And Father, glorify your name, Lord, as we come to talk about your words and exhort one another and bless one another. Father, we thank you. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. All right. Well, this morning, I want to continue in looking at just talking about eschatology, about end times. The last couple of
Pastor Tim.
Good morning, Evan. The last couple of weeks, you know, we've been focused on really what I think is the core theme, especially when we're talking about end times. We need to understand what this kingdom of God is, because that's what the disciples expected was going to be next in the timeline with regards to end times. And so we spent a lot of time on that because I just wanted to help you see from the scripture, really from beginning to end, the focus on the kingdom. And I didn't even bring up actually one passage that I think is really helpful here. I just want to comment on it before we get to the focus of what I want to talk about today. But let's see if I can find it. Is it Romans 7? Yeah, Romans 11. It's kind of interesting. The 11th or the 7th trumpet, when it sounded, and notice what is said that after that 7th trumpet in verse 15 of Revelation 11. 7th angel sounded. There were loud voices in heaven saying, and notice what they are saying. This is like the cry of heaven at the end. The kingdom of this world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, that is his anointed one, his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever. So this is kind of the culmination, really, of end times prophecy, the culmination of human history. It's all headed towards the Lord Jesus Christ reigning as king. And so, again, like I said last couple of weeks, we could look at a lot of other passages. I know we looked at a lot. There's a lot more that we could have given attention to, that really there's this key focus on the kingdom. And with that focus, it is that Jesus is the coming king, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ, who will bring in that kingdom on earth and reign on David's throne for that 1,000 years. So now there is discussion, or I don't most, you know, if you're a believer, a genuine believer in Lord Jesus Christ, most every believer will agree on Jesus' second coming. But there then becomes some disagreement regarding what are the events that happen before his second coming and what events take place right after his second coming. You know, as there are those who would hold to this idea of that there's a millennial kingdom, a literal reign of Christ. And this is what I believe based upon a literal understanding of the prophecies, particularly Old Testament prophecies, that the Messiah will reign from earth. And Revelation tells us for 1,000 years. before the eternal state, before heaven comes to earth, before the New Jerusalem. There are others, though, who would say, well, no, there isn't a literal reign of Christ on earth. That's figurative. It's a spiritual sense that there's no millennial kingdom. But there is the reign of Christ, but it's just that millennial kingdom is happening now, that Christ is reigning now in some sense. And so those would be those we would say are amillennial. That is, they believe in the reign of Christ, just not in a literal 1,000 years. Then there are those who believe that what happens right before Christ's return, that the rapture. Some believe that there is no rapture before the second coming, that the church is taken up at the second coming. Others believe there's a rapture at the beginning of the tribulation, the 7-year period, which is what I hold to. Others believe that a rapture of the church will happen in the middle of the tribulation. Others believe it will happen just before the last pouring out of God's wrath in the tribulation. So there are differences of opinion about what will happen in the events right before the second coming, specifically regarding the rapture. And there is a difference of opinion on what happens right after the second coming, whether there's a literal reign of Christ on earth or whether we go into the eternal state. So what I wanted to do was to spend some time, and we'll just look at whatever passages we can look at. I picked a few key texts that I think help give us insight into these particular issues that I just mentioned. Probably one of the most important and most specific passages that we find is actually in the Old Testament and in the book of Daniel. I think Sandy mentioned last week, or asked the question last week about prophecy in the exile, during the exile. And actually some of the most detailed prophecy of future events took place during the exile, and we find it in the book of Daniel. And so I wanted to focus our attention on, we've looked at some Old Testament passages about the end times, but now I want to give attention specifically to a couple that I think are important for a few reasons. One reason is that they give much specific detail. A lot of the Old Testament prophecies have a lot of generalities. They tell of certain events, like maybe judgment upon a particular nation, or the restoration of Israel, or some certain aspect of God's blessing or of God's judgment. But some passages like Daniel 9 give very specific details about timing of certain events in the end. And I think Daniel 9 is probably among the most specific as it pertains to the tribulation and the second coming. And so I want to spend some time here this morning. I'm sure this passage is familiar to most of us, but I think it will be helpful just to take a look at what this passage has to say, and maybe there's a few aspects of it you haven't thought about or hadn't thought about in a while. So to do that, I want to first, of course, set a context. So we'll start at the beginning of Daniel chapter 9, and I'll ask a few of you guys if you could do some reading here. Why don't we start with Herman? Pastor Herman, if you could read verses 1 to 4, and then Jesse, if you could read verses 5 through, what is this, 7 here, or 8? This will just give us, this is the beginning of Daniel chapter 9, so this will sort of give us a context of what's going on. So, Pastor Herman, if you could read verses 1 to 4. Thank you.
Verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet for the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So I gave my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer and supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed and said, Alas, O Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments.
All right, Jess, you could pick up verse 5.
We have sinned, committed iniquity, acted wickedly, and rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and ordinances. Moreover, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, our fathers, and all the people of the land. Righteousness belongs to you, O Lord, but to us open shame, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those who are nearly and those who cannot see the next word, Pastor Tim.
Oh, are you looking at the right?
Verse 7. Okay. Okay. Righteousness belongs to you, O Lord, but to us open shame, as it is in this day, to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those who are nearby and those who are far away in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of their unfaithfulness or unfaithful deeds which they have committed against you. Open shames belong to us, O Lord, to our kings, to our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. To
All
the Lord
right.
our God belongs compassion and forgiveness, for we have rebelled against him.
Okay,
Until
good.
what
Let's
verse?
go ahead and stop there. I know you want to keep reading, brother, but we'll have to save your sermon, all right? You got to save your sermon for next week. Everybody's showing up at Banawa to hear you preach, so. Okay. So this just sets a context for us. So what are some things that we see here in this passage about the context? So let's just look at a few things. Verse 1, all right? Those of you who read, Herman, you read this part. Okay, so what are we told in these first couple of verses? What is the background? What is the setting here?
The setting about
The reign of Darius.
Darius was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans.
Yeah, so what does that tell us? What time period are we talking about here?
First year.
Yeah, the first year of Darius. So this is now the Babylonians have been defeated, right? Remember
Yes.
Cyrus?
Persian Empire.
Yeah, the Persian, this is now the
Medo-Persian.
empire, the Persian and the Medes, right?
Medo-Persian.
Yeah. And so Cyrus, he is the emperor of Persia, he appoints Darius as the ruler over the area that used to be Babylon. Okay, so this is, because we know this is the first year of Darius, this is likely then around, just based on Babylonian Chronicles, around 536 BC, somewhere around there. Now, what is special about this particular year? Daniel mentions it in verse 2.
Captivity.
Yes. Notice Daniel mentions the 70 years of captivity. What is he talking about there?
The end of exile.
Yes, the end of the exile, or as he refers to it, the completion of the desolations of Jerusalem. That word desolation is an important word that Daniel uses. It just means like to be ruined, to be made a wasteland, a place of ruin. So this is the end of the exile. Because remember, Nebuchadnezzar, the beginning of the exile was around 605 BC. Okay, that is when Daniel actually was taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, right? You remember there were three attacks by the Babylonians upon Jerusalem. The first was in 605. That's when Daniel was taken. The next one was in 597. That is when Ezekiel was taken. And then the last one was in 586. That's when Jeremiah left, around when Jeremiah left. But Daniel was taken in 605. And so now Daniel's talking about, we're talking about 70 years, puts us at around 535 or 536, somewhere in there. Okay, so now that is the time period here, right? Daniel's probably, close to 90 years old, 85 or 90 years old. And what is he reflecting on now? What is he thinking about?
The prophecy,
Yes,
the prophecy of captivity.
Fulfillment.
Typical
The
Jeremiah.
word of the Lord to Jeremiah.
Yeah, here I put those two passages here. Sandy, can you read these two passages from Jeremiah here?
Okay. Then the
Thank you.
priest and the prophet spoke to the officials and to all the people, saying, a death sentence for this man, for he has prophesied against the city, as you have heard in the hearing. Then Jeremiah spoke to all the officials and to all the people, saying, the Lord sent me to prophesy against this house and against the city all the words that you have heard. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years had been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my word to you, to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you future and hope.
All right, thank you. I meant to have Jeremiah 25
25, 11 to
verses
12.
11 and 12. Yeah, sorry about that. I'll put them over here just to have, because both of these passages tell us very explicitly that this time where people will be in exile is going to be 70 years. And so there, notice 70 years. Jeremiah said 70 years after the 70 years are completed. And then again in chapter 29, right? When the 70 years are completed. So what is it now? Daniel realizes it's been 70 years since he was first taken by the Babylonians. And so as he reflects on this in Daniel 9, what is his tone or attitude as he's thinking about this fact that it's been 70 years that Jerusalem has been, that we've been in exile in Babylon. So what is the expectation? Well, I guess first, what does this remind Daniel of? If you look at verse 4 and 5 and 6, he's praying,
Daniel,
right?
yeah, he's praying
Repentance.
repentance
Biblical prayer.
Yeah, he's repentant, right? For what?
for the sin of the people of Israel.
Yeah,
Their
exactly.
forefathers.
And so what is the content here of his prayer? What is he asking the Lord?
Asking for
Forgiveness.
forgiveness and also the
Restoration.
restoration, the fulfillment of the prophecy.
Yeah, he's
Remember
asking
your
God.
covenant.
I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Remember your covenant
Yes.
to your people.
Yes, he's asking God to keep his promises, to show mercy, to deliver them. And so, yeah, this is a really wonderful prayer. So this is how it opens, right? Daniel's thinking about, okay, It's been 70 years, Lord. We deserve what has happened to us. We've committed great sin. And now I appeal to you to show compassion, to keep your promise to us. And then, in fact, if we go down to verse 18 and 19, John, why don't you read these verses 18 and 19 from Daniel 9? Just
18 and
then
19.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh my God, incline your ear and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations and the city which is called by your name. For we are not presenting our supplications before you on account of any merits of our own, but on account of your great compassion. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, listen and take action. For your own sake, O my God, do not delay, because your city and your people are called by your name.
So John, since you read that, what's the tone here? What's Daniel's tone?
It's
Pleading.
pleading, it's calling on God for his mercy. It's like he's saying, Lord, remember you promised this after 7 years.
Oh
Have
Lord,
mercy on
listen.
us. 70 years.
Yeah, this is an earnest prayer, right? And he's praying fervently, passionately, right? Oh Lord, right? Oh my God, incline your ear. Oh Lord, hear. Oh Lord, forgive. Oh Lord, listen, right? We talked about that in our poetry, right? Look at all of these apostrophes. Oh Lord, right? Direct address. Oh Lord, oh Lord. So this is a passionate, earnest prayer on his part. And then things turn. All right, as he's praying, something happens. Kent, why don't you go ahead and read verses 20 to 23 here?
Now, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God in behalf of the holy mountain of my God, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision previously, came to me in my extreme weariness about the time of the evening offering. He gave me instruction, talked with me, and said, "Oh, Daniel, I have now come forth to give you insight with understanding. At the beginning of your supplication, the command was issued, and I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. So give heed to the message and gain understanding of the vision."
Okay, so what happens here, Kent?
Daniel praying and confessing, then the Lord God hear his prayer by speaking to the man Gabriel.
And what was
So
it that Gabriel tells him?
So Gabriel tells him that he gave instruction, and had now come forth to give you insight with understanding at the beginning of supplication.
Of what?
Of the I have come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed, so give heed the message of gain understanding of the vision.
Yes, a vision, some insight. Again, a vision's not like a dream. A dream takes place when you're asleep. A vision is sort of a dream when you're awake, where you see something in your conscience. You're not taking a nap, but you're actually physically awake and alert. And so you are shown something. And here apparently Daniel was shown a vision, because as he was praying, God sends Gabriel in order to give Daniel insight of this particular vision. And we're going to learn it's actually a vision of the future. Daniel here, again, this is significant, man, because think of the context here, the setting. What is it Daniel's thinking about? Right? He's thinking about really God's keeping a promise, a prophetic promise that God had predicted through Jeremiah Well, even earlier, God had predicted or prophesied or declared that Judah would be sent into exile. If you remember Habakkuk, in fact, when Habakkuk, right, he was crying out for the Lord to do justice because of all the sin that he observed. And God says, I will bring justice. I'm going to bring the Chaldeans, and they are going to take my people into captivity. And that's exactly what happened. And then Jeremiah comes along and says, look, God speaks through him and says, this is going to be 70 years as a judgment, a consequence for your sin. And so now Daniel, remembering what God had spoken through Jeremiah, and remember, they were alive at the same time, by the way, right? Jeremiah was ministered during the exile, before, during, and just after. All right. Daniel was alive the entire time of the exile. So Daniel was aware of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, by the way. Ezekiel also prophesied during the exile. In fact, Ezekiel mentions Daniel in some of his prophecies. Daniel 14, I think, is one of them. So Daniel is completely aware of what Jeremiah said, right? Because back in verse 3, he says, the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, regarding the basically the exile. So Daniel's completely aware of this. So he's thinking about something, an earlier prophecy given through Jeremiah regarding the people of Israel, and then he's given a vision. And as it turns out, this vision has something to do with future events. Daniel's thinking about a prophecy given regarding events that took place at his time. The Lord, as we will see in a moment, wants to give him insight into what is going to happen in the future. And again, we have to ask ourselves this question: why? All right, because remember, prophecy is never given, future events are never given just so that we know the future. They are given for a particular purpose, as we've discussed before. And so as we're talking about this, be thinking about what is it that is happening here. Again, as we look at verse 22, Daniel is in what is Daniel's condition as he is praying? What was his physical condition?
Weak.
Weak, right?
Like physically.
Extreme weariness. All right. And so here,
Exhausted.
pardon?
Exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. And so here, Daniel or Gabriel is sent in order to give insight and understanding to Daniel. As Daniel was pleading before God, he's weary, he's tired, he's discouraged, and God sends him, gives him this vision, and now is going to explain it to him. Again, I think as an encouragement, because guys, you got to think about what was the state at this time of the people of Israel. I mean, they're not in the land, at least many of them. The temple's completely destroyed. Jerusalem's completely destroyed. Again, it's a desolation. It's a ruin. All right. So think about this, guys. So what has God promised them all through history, that through Abraham, right? They would have a land, they would be many descendants, they would have blessing. And let's put ourselves in their shoes right now. It doesn't look like that's happening, does it?
Hopeless and discouraged.
Yeah, exactly. Hopelessness, discouragement. We'll see that later in the time of Zechariah and Haggai, right? Where when they go back to the land. In fact, right after this, some people do go back to the land in order to rebuild the temple, but everything is in ruin. And so Daniel, I think part of his earnestness is, okay, God, the 70 years are up. Can you revive and restore your people? Because your people are completely, I mean, we are captive in a foreign land. We are subject to all these false gods. and these pagan deities. Our land, Judah, Jerusalem is in ruins. The temple is destroyed. Jerusalem is completely a waste, a ruin. And so I think God here wants to encourage Daniel not only to say, you know, I'm gonna restore you, but he gives him specific insights into the future. And I think this was as an encouragement specifically to Daniel. So let's look at what the understanding of the vision is in Daniel chapter 9. And this is a key passage that we're given insight, Daniel 9:24-27. And I want to sort of go through this in detail, or at least in more detail, and just kind of look at some things here. So let's see, Edwin, can you go ahead and read verse? Well, go ahead and read all the chapter 9 verses 24-27.
Okay, Pastor Tim.
Thank you.
Verse 24, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and mowat, even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be war. Desolations are determined. Verse 27, and he will make a firm covenant with the many of 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate.
Okay, now there is a lot here. And notice it's very specific. But what I want you to pick up on is something that he mentions here. Notice this idea to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, that it will be built again. Again, think about what's foremost on Daniel's mind. The devastation of Jerusalem, right? So here, as he's given this prophecy, it's really sort of centers around or begins with this idea of, look, Jerusalem will be rebuilt. Why? Messiah is coming. Okay, now let's kind of go back to verse 24, and let me just ask you guys a few questions. How do we know that he's speaking here of the end times and not more recent events? I mean, he mentioned 70 weeks here. How do we know that he's not speaking of just a few months time period here?
To finish the transition.
Okay, I noticed the statements here: to finish the transgression, make an end of sin, make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness. Okay, have those things happened?
During their time, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, right? Israel is still in rebellion. Okay, so he's not talking about near future. He's talking about far future. Okay, when Jerusalem is restored, when there's an end of sin, when atonement's made for iniquity, when everlasting righteousness is brought in. And again, notice, decreed for whom, guys? 70 weeks have been decreed for
People.
your people and your holy city. Okay, we're talking about Jerusalem here. We're talking about people of Israel, right?
Right.
Okay, keep that in mind. Again, if we're looking at this as a literal, he's speaking to Daniel, okay, and he's telling Daniel, your people, Daniel. Who has Daniel been concerned about? His people, right? If you go back through the whole prayer, right, he's saying, look, verse 20, the sin of my people Israel. All right, go back up even further when he began his prayer. Or when he said, righteousness belongs to you, O Lord, but to us open shame, to the men of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and all Israel. Okay, our kings, our princes, our fathers, we have sinned against you. So Daniel is speaking of his fellow Jews, right? And so when God says in verse 24, your people, your city, he's not talking about the church. He's not talking about some future group of Gentiles. He's talking about Daniel's people. Okay?
Amen.
You with me? Otherwise,
And
what would this mean? Authorial intent would have no impact or importance to Daniel. How would Daniel know that your people is referring to some other group of non-Jews? In the context here, it can't. All right, your people and your city is speaking of the Jews. Okay, Jerusalem. All right, this is important. You can't overlook this. And we know that he's speaking at end times because of these statements: finish the transgression, make an end to sin, make atonement for iniquity. That has not yet happened fully for the people of Israel yet. That will happen after the 70 weeks, whatever those are. Okay, and that brings us really to the next question. He talks about these 70 weeks. What is he referring to? Is he talking here about 70 literal weeks?
70 years.
Tribulation.
490 days. That's 16 months. Is that what he's speaking of?
77.
Yes. Yeah, literally here, he's speaking of 70 and then sevens. That's the literal term here. In fact, you probably have, yeah. If you go to the Hebrew Bible, in this particular verse, verse 24, it's just saying here 70 sevens. Okay, this is the word for seven in Hebrew. All right, and so it's 70 sevens. So the sevens aren't described. What? 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 years. It's just 70 sevens. Now, often that's a reference to weeks. That's why you see translations given that way, weeks. But it doesn't have to be weeks. There's no unit given. There's no word for years here or weeks here or days here. Hebrew has a word for that. Yom is a day. Year is Shana, I think, something like that. Shana. So those words aren't given here. It's just literally 70 sevens. Now we know it's not 70 weeks because this is not all that means this all would have happened within 16 months of this passage. But we know that didn't happen. Jerusalem was not rebuilt in 16 months from this time, right? It was 20 years later in 516 BC. So we know this 70 weeks is not 70 weeks. Okay, this is just put in by the translator.
70 times 7 years.
Well, it's just 70 sevens. That's the literal. So we have to figure out, well, what do the sevens refer to? Seven what? Okay, the ESV, let me see what they have. ESV put 70 weeks, but then they have a footnote, sevens. New King James says 70 weeks. They have a footnote, sevens. The NIV has 70. Notice the NIV. Hey, sometimes the NIV actually is more literal. Can you believe it? Wow. Praise God. Look at that. They actually, NIV, I have not seen this very often. The NIV is more literal. So we have to give NIV is actually translates it literally. Wow. So a point for the NIV this time. What do you know? And notice it's consistent throughout. Verse 25, 7, 7, 62 sevens. So the question then is, well, what are these sevens? What do they refer to? Again, sevens can refer to weeks, but here it's likely referring to years. Okay, what units of time do we have? We have hours, days, weeks, years. I guess you could say decades, but I don't know if there's a term for that in Hebrew.
490 years.
So yeah, I think years makes the most sense. And as we piece through the details of this, then we'll see that years actually makes the most sense. So the sevens here in this passage, again, could be hours. There's a word for hour, for days, weeks, or years. And again, it can't be any of these because like I said, even for example, Jerusalem wasn't rebuilt for another 20 years. So years is the most likely reference here. We know it's a period of time, right? Because it's 77s have been decreed. So he's speaking of a period of time, and then later the 7 sevens and the 62 sevens. He's describing a period of time. So we know that. We know he's describing a period of time, but it has to be more than weeks because, for example, Jerusalem was not rebuilt for another 20 years. Okay, 516 BC. We see that in Zechariah. Okay, that's when it was finished. So it has to be more than weeks. So years makes the most sense. Okay, does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions on that? All right, so that's how you can figure out, okay, what is it that he's referring to here? Because again, weeks, I think, is not a great translation because it can confuse us a little bit. They should put 77s. All right, and then they could put in parentheses years or something like that. You know, if they want to give an idea, but the literal translation would be 77s. And as we think about what that could be, years makes the most sense. Now,
Pastor Tim, excuse.
Yeah, go ahead.
1 week, it means what, 7 years?
Yeah, so 77s then would be 77s would be 70
Years.
Times 7 years. Okay, if a week, if a 7 is 7 years, I'll put years in.
490.
All right, so that would
490.
be, yeah. So the total would be 490 years. Okay. So he's saying 490 years have been decreed for your people and your city. All right, to get all of this done that he's going to talk about later. All right, so the question is, all right, 490 years has been decreed. Which is interesting too, by the way, and I think the Lord did it this way as 77s because how many years had Jerusalem been in exile?
70 years.
70. Okay, so that number 70 is kind of a significant number in this context. All right.
There's 10 weeks.
All right, so I think he uses that number 70 just as a connection point. All right, you've been in exile 70 years. Well, Daniel, there's 70 sevens have been, there's another 70 that's significant in the future of Israel and the future of your people. All right. And so he says 77s. And again, I think here's 70 groups of 7 or 77-year time periods. All right. That's what he's talking about here. And so the question then is, okay, well, what does that mean? Well, verse 25, we're given more details. So verse 24 just gives an overview. Okay, 70 groups of 7 years have been decreed. I'm making a decree, and it's specific to this 70 times 7 years have been decreed for your people, that there'll be restoration, atonement for sin. Again, remember what Daniel's prayer was: for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for God's mercy. All right, so God says, I will fulfill, I will keep that promise over this period of 77s or 70 7-year periods. All right. Then in verse 25, the Lord begins to break down. Again, Gabriel's the one explaining this, but obviously this is from the Lord. So Gabriel is breaking down these 77s. And how does he do it here? What does he describe for us in verse 25? Notice he says, right? He talks about the issuing of a decree to do what?
Restore and rebuild Jerusalem.
All right, so restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay. And then from that time until the Messiah comes will be what? How long?
7 weeks.
7 weeks, 62 weeks.
7. Well, let's not use weeks here. 7 sevens, because that's what the literal is. And 62 sevens.
Sevens.
Okay. It will be built again. So from the time of, again, he's encouraging Daniel here. He's saying, look, Daniel, Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt and restored. And from that time until the Messiah comes will be this 7 sevens plus 62 sevens, which again, if the sevens refer to years, and they do, that is how many years? All right, this is very specific.
3 years.
Now, when was Jerusalem rebuilt? Again, notice he's saying Jerusalem. He didn't say the temple.
605.
Okay. So 605 BC
BC.
was when, oh, here, let me do this. 70. I'll just do this. All right. So 605 BC, that was when,
Exile.
that was the beginning of the exile, right?
Yes.
That's when Daniel was taken. Daniel 1:1 describes that. And 536 or so, maybe 535, is Daniel chapter 9. 516 about is when the temple was rebuilt. And you can see that in Ezra. Ezra, what is it? 6? I can't remember. Zechariah. Now, we're not talking about the temple being rebuilt. Notice it says here, he's talking about Jerusalem being rebuilt. When did that happen?
After 40 years,
What book do we read about Jerusalem being rebuilt?
96
Yeah.
BC.
Nehemiah.
Nehemiah, rebuilding the
Nehemiah,
wall.
that's right. Nehemiah chapter
Nehemiah.
2. And if we now there's no dates obviously in the Bible, but if we can piece together just from our understanding of history, this takes place around 445 BC. That's when Jerusalem is rebuilt in the days of Jeremiah. Now, 483 years after this, guess what? Give or take, again, there may be a few years difference here, but if we go look at 483 years later, guess what happens? It's just simple math. Okay. It's around, this would be around 28 AD.
28 AD.
Remember, Jesus was probably born around 4 or 5 BC. So this is when Jesus was. In fact, let me take you to Luke. This is when he approached Jerusalem, okay, during the triumphal entry. And let's see, Joshua, why don't you go ahead and read this? Luke 19, 41 and 42.
Luke 19:41 to 42. When he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and wept over it, saying, "If you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes."
And then he refers to the 70 AD, that when they will be overthrown. But notice, I've got to wonder, we're not told explicitly, this is just my opinion, but if you had known in this day, I wonder if Jesus is making reference to Daniel's prophecy. Again, don't know for sure, but we do know, if we look at Daniel, verse 25, this 483 years from the time of rebuilding Jerusalem until the Messiah Prince, okay? And this is where, again, remember, the people are acknowledging Jesus as the king. Now, of course, they crucify him just, a few days later. But this is the point in which Jesus is publicly declared as the Messiah. Before that, it was just private. Jesus mentioned to some people he was the Messiah. He told the woman at the well he was the Messiah. So I believe this is a very, very specific statement about the triumphal entry. Again, the triumphal entry was the time where Jesus was declared as Messiah publicly. All right. So I think verse 25 is a specific statement about the time when Jerusalem be rebuilt, which was in the days of Nehemiah, until Jesus comes into Jerusalem. That is 483 years. If we have our dates correct, based upon some, other historical documents. So I think that's pretty cool, guys. This is a prophecy given, a very specific one that we see specifically fulfilled. And there is a question, I don't know, maybe you guys have an idea. Why do you think that, why didn't Gabriel just say 69 weeks or 69 sevens, excuse me? Why did he say 7 sevens and then 62 sevens? Anybody have an idea?
Because when God revealed about years to come, many years to come, it's so hard to count those years, to have patience.
Perhaps.
Yeah. It might be that when God revealed about those years, many years to come, it might be for Israel losing hope at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question though is why did he specify this 7 sevens and then 62 sevens? Is there something special about those 7 sevens, right? 7 sevens would have been the 49 years. And 62 sevens was then the rest of the years. What would that be? 400 and
A double fulfillment, Pastor Tim.
of what? I'm not sure I have the answer. I'm just curious. There are some different opinions. I have an idea myself, but I'm just curious what you guys thought. Why did he split it up instead of just saying, look, in 483 years or in 69 sevens, from the time Jerusalem's rebuilt until Messiah the Prince comes, there'll be 69 sevens. Why does he say 7 sevens and then 62 sevens? That's my question.
What is your answer, Pastor Tim?
Well, I'm just curious what you guys think.
Wow, naman.
I don't think I have the answer, but I have an idea that makes a little sense, I think, I guess. Anybody else have any ideas?
We
Yes,
refer to your ideas, Pastor Tim. We refer to your ideas. We surrender our ideas to you.
yeah, I don't know. I guess what I wonder is, okay, if you think about 49 years from the time of Nehemiah would be about, would be around 400 BC, right? Technically, it'd be what, 396? 445 plus 4, yeah. So what do we know about around that time period? That's around the time Malachi prophesied, we think. So I wonder if this is just a reference to, what's key about that time period is after Malachi was
God's
a period of silence, right?
God's silence.
So I wonder, maybe it's just marking the last prophet, the last Old Testament prophet, until or the time when God stopped speaking through prophets until the birth of Christ. I don't know. It's not given to us explicitly here, so we're just guessing. But that's one possibility that that could be. The key though is in totally that the 69 sevens is 483 years, which does put us right at the first coming. And that's what's significant here, all right? Between
just like first Advent Messiah.
Yeah, the first, yes, exactly. The first coming, the first advent. So Daniel's being given here a specific prophecy of when the Messiah would arrive or come. And it is 483 years, which is almost exactly the time of Jesus's triumphal entry. And so at that same time, though, notice, what does verse 26 tell us? What's going to happen to the Messiah?
Crucified.
will be cut off.
will be cut off and have nothing.
Yeah, it says he'll be cut off, okay, which likely refers to his death. That's predicted in Isaiah 53. Okay, so which makes sense, right? Obviously, in the first coming, the Messiah's first coming, he was, he was killed, right? Of course, we know that Jesus was crucified on the cross. The cross isn't mentioned here; it just says he's cut off.
At
So
the age
at
of
that,
33.
sorry,
The age of 33, he was being cut off.
exactly. Exactly. And then notice it says the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Okay, in this context, what is the city?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, right? Again, the city in this context, that's key, is Jerusalem. Now, when did that happen? And by the way, the sanctuary, since the city is Jerusalem, what is the sanctuary?
Temple.
Temple. Okay. So it says, okay, from the time Jerusalem's rebuilt until the Messiah will be 483 years. That's by the lunar calendar. If you transition to the Gregorian calendar, that's 476 years. So just to be aware of that. When he talks about years here in the Old Testament, you got to remember they went by a lunar calendar, which was, the year was 360 days. Okay. Just keep that in mind. But in any case, that still puts us right around the time of the triumphal entry. So it says here, after 69 sevens, the Messiah arrives, but at that time, the Messiah is killed. And then he talks about this people of the prince to come will destroy the city. So it's like, yes, Jerusalem will be rebuilt, but then it's going to be destroyed again. Oh, right. And its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there will be a war. Now, when was Jerusalem destroyed?
AD 70.
Yeah, it was destroyed not long after the coming of Christ, right? 70 AD, that's only what, about 40 years after Christ. All right, so it doesn't say when that city would be destroyed. It just said that would be the next thing that would happen. After the 69 or 62 sevens, he's referring to that second group, but we know that's still 69 sevens in the future from the rebuilding of Jerusalem. The Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come, basically in that generation, destroys the city. That I believe is, yes, the Roman invasion in 70 AD. All right. But notice here, there's this prince who is to come. And then there's the people. All right. Who are the people that destroyed the city? Yeah, those are the Romans, right? Okay, that's the Romans that he's talking about there. Okay, which we could go back to Daniel 2. You remember the statue? Gold, silver, bronze, iron, clay, right? Rome is that fourth kingdom. Okay, and Rome's going to come up again in Daniel chapter 11. Okay, even to the end, it says here, will come even to the end, there will be a war, desolations are determined. All right. From this point in time, the time of the first coming to the end, that's the time we're living in. This is just a general statement here. Okay. That there's a gap, because notice how many we have. We don't have the 77s fully accounted for yet, do we? Right? Remember at the beginning, Gabriel said there will be 77s. And then he talked about 7 sevens. All right. And that,
67.
again, that may be, I'm just putting maybe Malachi. I'm going to put Malachi, big question mark, because we don't know. And then the 62 sevens. All right. Plus the 62 sevens. That puts us in
69.
all right, crucifixion, then the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So, but we still have 1/7 unaccounted for, right? 69 of them. Okay, that equals 69 sevens. Okay, that's been accounted for, but 1/7 is still
Will that
left.
be 7 years tribulation, Pastor Tim?
Yes, there is 1/7 left. And notice it says in verse 27, he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Ah, there's my last 7.
1-7.
Okay, because
Seven
notice
years.
at the beginning,
Tribulation.
yep, notice in the beginning he says 77s. Actually, let's do the NIV since it's literal here. In the beginning, verse 24, 77s. And then verse 25, 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Okay, and then he again mentions the 62 sevens. That's the time of the first coming. But he doesn't mention any other 7 until verse 27 when he mentions the 1/7. Ah, there it is. Now, what happens in that 1/7? He will make a firm covenant with the many for 1/7. Who is the he here?
Antichrist.
Israel.
The
Oh,
prince.
Antichrist.
Yeah, let's speak in context here. The
Antichrist.
he
The
is,
prince.
yeah, the
The
people
prince.
of the ruler who will come.
The prince who is to come.
Will
Okay,
destroy the
or in,
city.
yeah, the New American Standard has
The prince.
the prince. That word just means ruler, can mean prince. The prince who is to come. All right, so verse 27, all right, the he refers to the prince who is to come. All right, from verse 26. That is the nearest antecedent. All right, and it speaks of this prince of the enemies of the Messiah.
Antichrist.
Pastor
Okay,
Tim.
the Assyrian king.
yeah, Jesse.
Hello, Pastor Tim. Does this means that this prince will come from the Roman Empire?
Well,
Assyrian.
maybe it's the Pope.
No, Roman Empire.
Yeah, that seems to be the implication from the Roman Empire, which again, remember, the Roman Empire expanded.
Maybe in the Philippines. Kibuloy.
Davao.
From Davao, maybe. Yeah, we're not
It's
given
not
specificity. It just speaks of this prince, this ruler who comes from the people who destroyed the city of Jerusalem, which we know those are the Romans. So he, in some way, is connected to that. And this person, this prince, this ruler, this king, will make a firm covenant with the many. Now, in this context, who are the many?
Israel.
Yeah, the Daniel's people. Okay, so the Jews. So he's going to make this covenant with the Jews for 1 week or 1/7.
Pastor Tim, why is the term mainly used? What probably is the reason?
Well, it can be just a general reference to a group of people at that time.
The unbelieving Jewish people.
I guess.
Yeah, I don't think
Oh.
I don't think we can give any specificity to it. Let me see that the word that's used for it. Covenant for 7. Yeah, it's just a general term for let's see here. Faith. I remembered that being, yeah, that's an agreement. Berith agreement makes, yeah, the Ravim. Yeah, that just means with the group. So he doesn't specify who they are. Okay. So there are many specifics here in this prophecy, but not everything is spelled out exactly. But the idea, I think, in this context is he's make a firm covenant with the many. Well, the many would be the people of Israel,
Jews.
the Jews, right? But we don't know specifically which Jews, just the many is said for 1 week, all right, or for 1/7, sorry. The covenant is made for 1/7, okay? And in this context, what is the 7 referred to?
Yeah, 7 years.
7 years. All right, so there's this covenant made, a commitment made by this coming prince who's connected somehow to the Roman Empire. He makes a covenant with the Jews for 7 years. Okay, and then in the middle of the 7, what happens?
Break the covenant of peace.
Yeah, in the middle of the 7. So what is that? After 3.5 years,
Breaking
Up the sacrifice.
he breaks
3.5 peace,
covenant.
3.5 war.
covenant of peace.
And then what happens? This
Is war.
abomination of desolation takes place. Whatever that is. Okay?
Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
the general understanding of this covenant is covenant of peace. Is there any specific passage that states that this is indeed a covenant of peace?
Well, it's funny you should ask. The idea seems to be a covenant of peace because he makes this firm covenant with them, but notice the contrast. He'll put a stop to sacrifice, grain offering, and then bring complete destruction. So the idea is because the contrast, but that this covenant is a covenant of peace, but then he breaks it and brings destruction.
Pastor Tim, implied of this covenant is the rebuilding of the temple, because
Don't know.
it's
That would be a good, that would be a reasonable expectation or assumption given the context here, right? Because he just said the city and the sanctuary is destroyed. And then
Probably.
at some point later, a 7-year period later, he'll make a firm covenant, this prince, with the many for 1 week. What's that?
That's probably what Pastor Tim.
It's probably what?
Rebuilding of the temple. Part of the covenant.
It could. The covenant, I think, has the idea of peace, okay, given the but at the rest of the verse. It could refer to rebuilding.
Because in verse 27, Pastor Tim, he stopped the sacrifices.
Well, yeah, here's what's interesting. So yeah, it's mentioning here, okay, so in the middle of the week, the middle of the 7, he puts a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And there's this description of an abomination of desolation. Now, what is that? He doesn't mention here specifically what that is. It's just there's going to be some terrible event that takes place in the middle of the week. and he puts a stop to temple activity, which again implies the temple is built, right?
Yes.
I'll just put that sacrifice, grain offering, implies temple has been built. All right. Now we have to here, I think it's helpful because some specifics aren't given. If we go to 2 Thessalonians, I think that helps give us a little bit of insight here. Let's see. Who hasn't read yet? Manuel, can you read this? 2 Thessalonians 1, verses 1 through 4.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or to be disturbed either by spirit or a message or a letter as if from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one in any way deceive you. It will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seats in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God.
Okay, notice, interesting enough, this man of lawlessness is described as the son of destruction. And again, back in Daniel, right, it talks about this destruction taking place. And what does this particular man of lawlessness do?
He will exalt himself.
Where?
And
All
sits
of
at the
In the temple.
sit,
Yes, temple.
displaying himself as being God.
Yeah, I believe this is what Daniel's talking about.
Also in the gospel, Pastor in Matthew 24, the Lord also mentioned standing in the holy place as what Prophet Daniel mentioned.
Yeah, if you go to Matthew 24, okay, Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, right? He said that's when it's going to get bad. And when does this abomination happen? What did Daniel say? When does it take place?
Three and a half.
After 3.5 years.
Yep, in the middle of the last 7. Okay. All right, so right, the 3.5 years into the covenant between, we know this, we'll just call him the prince and the Jews. Okay, we know him to be the Antichrist from other passages, but all right, and so in the middle, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of through Daniel, and I believe what that is when the covenant is broken, that the Jews are not allowed to continue in making sacrifices and those things. And he goes to the temple and he says, I am God. And that's when things really get bad in the tribulation. So I think if we make certain connections, what is, you have to just think about this sort of logically. If we look at the 70 weeks, 69 weeks are accounted for, but that last week is 7 years long. And it's a time when there's this abomination of desolation, this destruction that takes place from one who's referred to as the prince. And then Jesus in Matthew 24 says, when you see that happen, this event in the middle of this last 7-year period, when you see that, he says, basically run for the hills, because that's when it's going to get really bad. And notice the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. And that's why I believe 2 Thessalonians gives us insight that is literally, it is the Antichrist taking his stand in the temple, declaring himself to be God. That's the abomination of desolation.
Pastor Tim, in okay. As we go back, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, okay, let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless comes apostasy first. So the word apostasy is related to this man of lawlessness.
Yeah, the falling away.
Apostasy comes first.
Yeah.
Pastor Tim, my question is, in Matthew 24, it's referred to Jews or Israel. In 2 Thessalonians, referred to the church. That's what it means. That's
He's
the event.
speaking of that. So I'm sorry, ask your question again.
Because in Matthew, the audience here is Israel,
Correct.
the Jews. And then in 2 Thessalonians, the church. So it's the same event that what will happen in this future.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to affect everybody, right? So Daniel, he was given specific events in the future regarding his people. All right, that's the context there. What's going to happen regarding Israel? Well, he says there's 77s that have been decreed regarding the future of Israel. In 69 of those sevens, the Messiah will come. 69 sevens from the rebuilding of Jerusalem. That is the first coming. All right. Now it makes sense that then the second coming is connected to that last seven. And Daniel's going to come back to that later in Daniel chapter 12, but also even too in Daniel chapter 9. Let me see. Right, that's evident, and then we get some more prophecies after that. In Daniel 12, he's going to come back to this. But there's an interesting thing I wanted to draw your attention to. There was another abomination of desolation that took place in history. I was hoping to go through this chapter, but since we're out of time almost, there was another abomination of desolation that took place that has already happened. And it's when Antiochus Epiphanes slaughtered a pig in the temple. And that's what set off the Maccabees and the whole thing with the Jews then rose up under the Maccabees and threw off their oppressors. But so we know this abomination of desolation. There's a previous example where a pig was offered in the temple, and Antiochus Epiphanes actually declared himself as a deity of sorts. So we have a precedent of this event. It's going to happen again from the Antichrist, who will declare himself to be God in the temple. And I believe that is the event, the abomination of desolation, that Jesus refers to in reference to Daniel, that at the middle of the 7-year period, this prince, who we know to be the Antichrist, is going to take his stand in the temple, break the covenant of peace with Israel, and declare himself to be God. And then things really get bad.
It is
So,
Pastor Tim, the future Antichrist is a photocopy of Antiochus Epiphanes.
No, I don't think specifically. I just think though that there is a similar event taking place in Israel's history already, and so I think that just indicates to us or reinforces that it has to do with a blasphemous act within the temple.
Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
in light of the apostasy comes first in 2 Thessalonians related to the man of lawlessness, it might be well be said that in the first place he was a believer, a false believer, because apostasy, the word apostasy gives emphasis about him.
Well, it doesn't say specifically that's in reference to him. The apostasy comes, that could just simply be the breaking of the covenant. That could just be there's a falling away. The word apostasy just means, if you look at, I can even show you if you want to. Oh, the font's too small here.
Apostasy, positive in the church
No,
or the
No, I don't think so. It's in reference
The
to
clear
the
teaching of apostasy was found in
man of
Hebrew
destruction.
chapter 6 of the believers.
No,
Was not him.
I don't think so.
In Hebrew 6, there's a clear teaching of apostasy of the believers.
Yeah, but that doesn't, you got to look at the things in context, guys. Don't just go by, if you see one word in one place, that it has to mean the same thing or refer to the same thing somewhere
I
else.
think not Thessalonican.
Yeah, in this context, it's only speaking of the Antichrist. All right.
Pastor Tim, if I may add, I think the clear illustration of apostasy during tribulation period is found in Revelation 13 when God is openly cursed and Satan is worshipped and
Yeah, I
people
think
are turning from.
that's the idea here. This is all, this context here is just speaking in regards to the Antichrist, right? Apostasy doesn't always mean someone who's a Christian and then, or claims to be a Christian and then turns away. That word apostasy just is, that's why I was trying to find it here for you. It just means, here, I'll just show you. Defiance, rebellion, abandonment. Okay, that's the general meaning. So you have to look at what the context is to determine what it means specifically. Now in Hebrews 6, it's referring to those who claim to be Christians who rebel, who turn away, who walk away from the faith. But in a general sense, it just means this idea of abandonment, notice here, or breach of faith. So that would be consistent with the breaking of a covenant, right?
okay, okay.
Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
going back to Antiochus Epiphanes, we can say that he is not the ultimate fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 because the Lord mentioned him, mentioned this abomination that causes desolation as future events.
Yes.
Am I right in saying that, Pastor Tim?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. I think you're correct. Just can you say that one more time so I can follow?
Okay. Because somebody might say that, the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecies at Antiochus Epiphanes. So we can probably say that he is not the ultimate fulfillment because
Yes.
the Lord later quote the desolation that causes or
Correct.
the abomination that causes desolation as a
Right.
future thing.
Yeah, exactly. Jesus says there's some in the future. Daniel's spoken of an event in the future relative to Christ. So it hasn't happened yet. When you see the abomination, those who are in Judah. So this is a future event, future to Jesus. All right. So it cannot be a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes. It must be speaking of this future abomination that Daniel's talking about in Daniel 9, not the abomination of desolation in Daniel 11. All right. In that context, in Daniel chapter 11, that abomination of desolation, we know clearly is in reference to one of the kings that Daniel speaks of. And that king, as it turns out, is Antiochus Epiphanes. So yes, Matthew 24 lets us know that Daniel 9:27 has not yet been fulfilled. And I believe when it is fulfilled is referred to in 2 Thessalonians as the time when the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, declares himself to be God. And I think the apostasy there is the breaking of the covenant, which Daniel speaks of.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Tim.
All right, that's just my view on that.
So
So,
Antiochus Epiphanes, Pastor Tim, is just a, can we call him as just a preview of what is to
Preliminary.
come in the Christ?
Yeah. And of course, we know, I think,
Or did
John, what's that?
yeah, Pastor Tim, did Daniel just say or use the words abomination of desolation somehow to describe the grave what you call this, sin or disrespect of Antiochus by offering a pig in the temple?
Yeah, abomination just right is the idea of disgusting,
Yeah.
detestable, making you sick. I think that's the literal meaning of the word. Makes you want to vomit. So it's this idea of an event that takes place that is disgusting. And so in God's eyes, obviously, in the Jews' eyes, offering a pig in the temple was disgusting. But what's even of greater disgust is when a man claims in the temple to be God. In the very house of God, he claims to be God. So these are two separate events. The abomination of desolation from Antiochus Epiphanes was the offering of the pig in the temple. That's already happened. But there's a future abomination of desolation that Jesus refers to from Daniel that is yet to happen. And I believe that's when the man of lawlessness makes himself out to be God. Sandy, do you have a question?
Who's this Antiochus Epiphanes? The first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth?
Fourth. Antiochus the fourth.
Pastor,
Okay, complete.
Silingan ninyo bro, katong silingan ninyo.
Junior.
Your neighbor.
Klaro na to, kaya may first,
That's why we
second,
don't
third,
eat lechon.
Junior to son.
Pastor Tim. Pastor
Yeah.
Tim.
Eric.
I like what Chuck Swindoll says, that Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 to 27 is the backbone of biblical prophecy. When you understand it, you can understand Christ, you can understand Israel, you can understand Antichrist.
Yeah. Yeah, because it foretells of the first coming and then describes really the events leading up to the second coming. Because those 7 years, the way they end is with Jesus, the second advent, the second coming of Christ, which Daniel is not mentioned specifically in Daniel 9, but we do come back to it later in Daniel. So we'll see maybe next week. I was hoping to do Daniel 11 and 12. So maybe we'll try to take a look at that. There's a lot of passages I wanted to do with you guys, but we'll see. We'll maybe take another week or two and look at a couple more texts together. I wanted to look at Matthew 24 as well, talk a little bit about that. And then I think Revelation 19 and 20 are important as well. So, all right, we'll see.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor
All
Tim.
right,
We have learned a lot today.
Good. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
A lot of
So excited
information.
here.
Yeah. We almost forget our lunch because of your topic. Yeah. Thank you.
No, I didn't forget my lunch. I'm hungry now.
Our lunch is lechon.
Lechon, yeah, but don't do it in the
From
temple.
the Antiochus,
Descendants of Antiochus the fourth.
Antiochus 20, the first lesson. He offered in the temple.
Yeah, it's I agree with Pastor Chuck though, that Daniel 9:24 to 27, those 77s are a real core statement of history because they describe events at the first advent and those leading up to the second. second advent or second coming, and they're very specific. And so I think that's very helpful. And again, remember though, these details were given to Daniel as an encouragement to him. He was weary, he was discouraged, he was thinking about the condition of his people, and God brought those words of prophecy to him to encourage him and say, look, Daniel, I haven't forgotten my promises. And by the way, let me give you some specifics, just so you know, I am sovereign over this, and I will bring the Messiah. He will come. The city will be rebuilt. And he will, and Daniel, of course, knew some of the prophecies regarding the Messiah, right? Isaiah had prophesied about the Messiah 150 years earlier. So Daniel was, I'm certain, aware of those things. So God's just telling him, look, there's a connection. The Messiah is coming, and the city will be rebuilt, and he will come, at this specific time after that. And then, of course, he's given more information later in Daniel 11 and Daniel 12. So maybe we'll take a look at that next week together, Lord willing. Okay.
Okay.
All right. A lot covered there. So I hope that was helpful. Let me ask Jed, if you're there, can you close us in prayer?
Yes,